Why ancient Greek merchants never did 50 over 50 partnerships. The Golden Code. The reason 50 over 50 partnerships fail is not incompatibility. It is not bad timing. It is not the wrong partner. It is mathematics. The moment you divided everything equally, you created a structure that cannot survive a single serious disagreement. You have been told that splitting things down the middle is the honorable way, the trustworthy way, the visible proof of a real partnership between two people who respect each other. And that belief, that deeply held, culturally reinforced belief, has cost more people, more wealth, than almost any other single financial decision they have ever made. By the end of this teaching, you will understand why the most successful merchants in the ancient world never built on equal ground, and you will know exactly how to restructure any partnership you are currently in or considering before it costs you what took you years to build. A prayer for wisdom in the alliances you construct awaits you at the close. The world tells you that 50 over 50 is fair, that equal division signals equal commitment, that having everything proves trust, protects friendship, and ensures that neither person walks away with an unfair advantage over the other. The world presents the 50 over 50 as the mature answer, the conflict-free answer, the answer that honors the relationship and keeps the peace. The world is giving you directions to a collapse. This is not a fairness problem. This is an architecture problem. And the difference between those two diagnoses will determine whether your next partnership builds something lasting or becomes the most expensive relationship of your life. The great deception of the 50 over 50 split is this. It feels like balance, but it functions like paralysis. When you hand two people identical authority over a shared outcome, you have not created a partnership built for forward movement. You have created a permanent negotiation, one where every decision is a vote, every disagreement is a stalemate, and every moment of real pressure becomes a test of the structure. And the structure was never built to hold. Here is the diagnosis, and it is brutal. The 50 over 50 model is not a partnership design. It is a conflict design wrapped in the language of fairness. You call it equal. What you have built is a vehicle with two steering wheels and no assigned driver. Two steering wheels does not mean better control. It means the vehicle cannot turn when it needs to. The world tells you that equal ownership means equal skin in the game. The world is telling you a story that sounds like wisdom and functions like a trap. Most people who enter a 50 over 50 agreement do so because they want to avoid a harder conversation at the beginning. If you take 60 and your partner takes 40, someone might feel diminished. If you lead and your partner follows, someone might feel subordinate. And so to protect the comfort of the relationship at the start, you divide everything equally, and you guarantee that the relationship will fracture under weight later. This is not a modern error. This is not a product of modern business culture or modern sentimentality about fairness. This mistake is ancient. The ancient world made it. The ancient world paid for it. And the ancient world left behind detailed evidence of exactly what it costs and exactly what works instead. The principle encoded in the oldest gold story ever told is this. Equality of outcome without clarity of role is not generosity. It is ambiguity. And in commerce, ambiguity is always expensive. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the merchant networks of Athens operated under a commercial structure called the nautikon denion, the maritime loan. It was the primary financing engine of the ancient Mediterranean world, and it was built on asymmetry by design. Deliberate, structured, documented asymmetry, not as a concession to greed, but as a recognition of reality. Here is how it worked. A financier, someone with accumulated capital who was not making the voyage, would provide funds for a maritime trading expedition. The merchant, someone with sea knowledge, established trade contacts, and the capacity to execute the journey would carry out the voyage. Both parties brought something essential to the agreement. Neither party brought the same thing, and the contract reflected that distinction with precision. The financier carried the capital risk. If the ship was lost at sea, the loan was forgiven. The merchant owed nothing. The financier absorbed the total loss of the invested capital. That was the exposure assigned to the capital side. But if the voyage succeeded, and the rates acknowledged the reality that most voyages did succeed, the return was not a polite, comfort-seeking number. Demosthenes, the Athenian orator whose legal speeches preserve some of the most detailed commercial records of the ancient world, documented maritime loan rates in his speech against Lycurgus. The rates ranged from 22 to 30% per voyage, depending on the route and the season. Notice that number. Not 5%. Not the modest return of someone who wants to appear reasonable. 22 to 30%. Because the Athenians understood something that every modern 50/50 agreement ignores entirely. The return must reflect the risk. And the risk is never equal between two parties, contributing fundamentally different things to the same enterprise. The merchant who made the voyage did not demand 50% of the financier's accumulated capital in exchange for providing the labor. The financier did not demand 50% of every future voyage the merchant would ever undertake in exchange for this one investment. Each had a defined role. Each had a defined exposure. Each had a defined return. The agreement had clarity before the ship left the harbor. And notice what Demosthenes reveals in his speech about what happened when these terms were disputed. There were courts. There were written contracts. There was legal infrastructure built specifically to resolve commercial disagreements arising from unclear terms. The Athenians did not avoid the hard conversation at the start and then resolve it informally later. They had the hard conversation first, documented it, and built systems to enforce it. This same principle ran through the trade arteries that gave kings their power. Phrygia sat at the crossroads of the Aegean world and the kingdoms to the east. Herodotus documented the commercial networks that connected these regions, networks that accumulated wealth not through equal division, but through structured hierarchy, defined contribution, and agreements that were clear before the first transaction was made. The king whose name became synonymous with gold did not rule over commerce built on vague handshakes. The wealth that flowed through those routes was built on structure. And when the structure failed, when Croesus of Lydia, described by Herodotus as the richest ruler the ancient world had seen, entered into a strategic alliance he had not properly evaluated before committing, he lost everything. The wealth survived. The structure did not. And without the structure, the wealth followed. The story of Midas reveals this directly. Gold without wisdom is not wealth. It is weight. A 50/50 agreement is gold without structure. It looks valuable until the pressure comes. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this ancient wisdom is traveling across the world. Now, let us go deeper. Because the 50/50 problem is not one problem. It is 4 separate traps stacked inside each other. And most people who enter a failing partnership will only ever identify the first one after the damage is already irreversible. Here is where most people miss the foundation entirely. The first trap is the asymmetry of contribution. The 50/50 assumes that both parties are giving equal inputs. But equal inputs are a fiction from day one. One person brings capital. The other brings labor. One person brings the industry relationships. The other brings the technical depth. One person is available 50 hours a week and has no other income obligations. The other is building this alongside a full-time employment commitment. One person has built this type of business before and is risking both money and reputation. The other is learning the industry in real time and risking only their hours. None of those contributions are equal. They are not supposed to be equal. The entire logic of a partnership is that two people bring different things, because if they brought identical things, there would be no partnership. You would simply be doubling what you already have. And here is the fatal error. When you price two unequal contributions at 50% each, you have not resolved the inequality. You have hidden it beneath a clean-sounding number. And what is hidden does not dissolve. It compounds. It compounds silently through the daily operation of the business until the first genuine moment of pressure, the first revenue shortfall, the first major strategic disagreement, the first moment when one person has to sacrifice something concrete and the other does not. And then everything hidden surfaces at once, dressed in the language of principle. Charlie Munger said it with the precision of someone who had watched this pattern destroy businesses, his entire working life. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. A 50/50 structure does not create equal incentive. It creates equal claim on outcome with unequal investment in input. That is not an incentive to give more. That is an incentive to give the minimum that still protects your 50%. When your ownership share is identical, regardless of how much more you contribute, the rational response to any increased burden is to ask why you should bear more of it than your partner. Stop and ask yourself something honest. In every partnership you have witnessed, including the ones you have been directly part of, did both parties work with equal urgency when pressure came? When revenue was short, did both people cut back equally? When the work became harder than expected, did both people show up with equal consistency? You already know the answer. The 50/50 did not produce equal commitment, it produced equal claim. And equal claim without equal contribution is the quiet deterioration at the center of every partnership it enters. Here is where the trap becomes invisible. The second trap is the vacuum of authority. This one does not appear in the first months. It reveals itself in month 18, month 30, the moment the partnership reaches a decision that one partner urgently needs and the other partner firmly opposes. In a 50/50 structure, neither party has final authority. And when final authority is absent inside an agreement, it does not remain absent. It migrates to whoever is louder, whoever is more willing to use the relationship as leverage, whoever has less to lose from the immediate conflict. The decision does not go to the person who is right. It goes to the person who is most willing to damage the partnership to get the outcome they want. The Athenian maritime contracts were explicit about authority. The language Demosthenes documented was not ambiguous about who decided what. The financier held authority over the loan terms. The merchant held authority over the navigational and commercial decisions of the voyage. There was no overlap zone, no territory where both parties had to reach consensus before either could act. Overlapping authority was not regarded as democratic governance. It was regarded as commercial incompetence. Benjamin Graham spent his career studying the conditions under which financial structures survive pressure and the conditions under which they collapse. His central principle, the margin of safety, was not a concept limited to stock valuation. It was a structural principle. If you have not built protection into the architecture from the beginning, the architecture will not protect you when the test arrives. A partnership with no designated decision authority has no margin of safety. It has a guaranteed failure point with an unknown trigger date. Consider what this means practically. You cannot move with speed in a 50/50 structure. Every time-sensitive opportunity that requires a decision faster than full consensus allows will pass before you can act. And in business, speed is frequently the only advantage you have over competitors with more capital, more experience, and more established relationships. The ancient merchant who could commit to terms and sail before the trading season changed was not faster because he was more talented. He was faster because his agreement structure allowed him to move without waiting for permission from someone who had equal authority to block him. Here's what most people miss entirely. The third trap is the exit problem, and this is the trap that can extract maximum damage even after both parties have already decided the partnership is over. A 50/50 structure has no natural exit mechanism. If you own 50% and your partner owns 50%, you cannot sell without the other agreeing. You cannot transfer your stake, liquidate your position, or restructure the ownership without full cooperation from the party you may now be in direct conflict with. And the most common reason a partner wants out is a serious disagreement with the other partner, which means the person whose cooperation you need to execute the exit is precisely the person whose behavior made you want to exit. You have built a building with 2 locks on the only door. Both keys belong to someone who is no longer willing to let you leave on reasonable terms. Warren Buffett has demonstrated for decades that the terms governing his investment relationships are never structured under duress. He has said clearly that his preferred holding period is forever, and he means it, but that preference is backed by structures that define what happens when forever ends. The exit is never an afterthought in a well-constructed agreement. The exit is an architectural feature, designed in advance, precisely because designing it under pressure means designing it badly. Most people building a 50/50 partnership avoid the exit conversation because they believe having it signals an expectation of failure. But here is the deeper principle Midas discovered the hard way. The people who define exit terms are the people who can afford to stay. If you cannot have a calm conversation about what happens when it ends, you have already surrendered control of the structure to the worst possible version of future events. Here is the principle that binds all three traps together. The fourth trap is the illusion of simplicity. The 50/50 feels clean. It requires no difficult conversation about who contributes more, who decides more, who earns more when the outcomes diverge. You agree on equal division, shake hands, and begin. The discomfort of a harder negotiation is avoided entirely, but the simplicity is a surface impression over vast hidden complexity. Every question the 50/50 avoids does not disappear. It defers. The unasked question about who leads becomes the argument in year 2. The unasked question about exit becomes the legal dispute in year 4. The unasked question about what happens when one partner underperforms becomes the dissolution of something that could have produced extraordinary results for both people. Aristotle, in the Politics, drew a distinction that cuts directly through this. He distinguished between exchange that serves a genuine human purpose, building something of real value through genuine contribution, and exchange constructed artificially to appear fair while concealing what it actually is. A 50/50 that labels unequal contribution as equal partnership does not serve the relationship. It deceives it. And the deception does not protect the relationship. It defers the cost of honesty until the moment when honesty is most expensive. This is not just philosophy. This is the mechanism by which real partnerships fall apart. The trap is not the disagreement. The trap is the structure that made the disagreement inevitable and left no tool for resolving it. The story of Midas reveals that transformation without wisdom is not wealth. It is chaos with a golden surface. The merchant who structured his agreements with clarity walked away from the voyage with his earnings intact. The merchant who shook hands on ambiguity walked away with a dispute that consumed everything the voyage had produced. If this teaching is shifting something in your understanding, if you can see now that there is a different way to build, tap the like button right now. It helps this message reach the people who need it most. And if you want more of the wisdom the Midas Code contains, subscribe to this channel. There is much more coming. Practical application begins with the honest audit you have probably been postponing. Step 1. Write down what you actually contribute and what your partner actually contributes, not what the agreement says, not what sounds fair in conversation, but what is genuinely moving from your side of the table every week. Capital, time, specialized expertise, sales relationships, execution consistency, reputation risk, operational capacity. List each element separately. Assign a realistic weight to each. If the totals are not equal, and they will not be, because they never are, then your ownership structure should reflect the actual inputs, not the comfortable fiction of equal division. If you cannot do this exercise honestly in writing, you are not yet ready to formalize the partnership. Step 2. Separate capital from labor in the agreement, and compensate each independently. This is the architecture the Athenian maritime contracts used with precision. The return on capital was calculated based on the capital at risk and the degree of that risk. The return on execution was calculated based on the performance of that execution. If you are providing the capital, your return should track the capital risk you are bearing. If you are providing the execution, your return should track what your execution actually produces. Combining both into a single 50/50 number obscures both contributions and makes it impossible to assess whether either party is actually performing. Separating them gives you a clear picture of the agreement and a clear standard for evaluating it. Step 3. Assign decision authority before any money moves. This does not require complex legal documentation on day 1. It requires one honest, recorded conversation. In the domains that require fast decisions, who holds final authority? You can divide authority by function. Financial decisions belong to one person, operational decisions belong to the other. But the division must be explicit and agreed upon before the first conflict makes agreement impossible. The ancient merchants did not negotiate authority after the storm found the ship. They defined it before the ship left the harbor. That is why the ship came back. Step 4. Write your exit terms before you write your launch plan. Define what triggers a buyout conversation. Define how the business is valued when one party wants out. Define what happens when one partner wants to exit and the other wants to continue. Establish the process, the timeline, and the valuation method. Define who has the right to initiate a buyout and under what conditions. This conversation does not signal that you expect failure. This conversation signals that you have built something worth protecting and that you respect the other person enough to protect the relationship from its worst possible future. The parties who negotiate exit terms with clear heads and aligned interests are the parties who can negotiate them rationally. The parties who defer this conversation will negotiate it under maximum stress, minimum trust, and maximum legal expense. Step 5. Build a renegotiation trigger into the agreement from the beginning. Circumstances change. The contribution that was accurate at signing may not be accurate in year 2. The person who was the primary driver of revenue in year 1 may be outpaced by the partner who was slower to start. Build an agreed mechanism, an annual structural review, or a review triggered by defined performance thresholds for assessing whether the agreement still reflects reality. Not to renegotiate out of convenience, but to ensure the structure continues to match the actual truth of what each party is contributing, risking, and committed to. A structure that cannot update itself will be updated eventually by a crisis. And crisis is the worst possible architect. This is not complicated. This is ancient wisdom, rewritten in the language your situation requires. Every sustainable commercial structure in the ancient Mediterranean world contained these elements: role clarity, contribution-based return, defined authority, and a pre-structured exit before the first transaction was made. Not because those merchants were more sophisticated than you, because they had already watched what happened without these elements. They had watched partnerships collapse into court disputes that consumed the profits of years. They had watched fortunes built across decades dissolve in months because the underlying agreement could not hold when the weight arrived. They encoded what they learned. They left it in the record. You have found it today. The question now is whether you apply it before the pressure comes or after. If you want to keep building with this kind of foundation with clarity, with historical evidence behind every principle, with tools you can use this week rather than next year, subscribe to this channel right now. What comes next will go even deeper into the financial principles the ancient code contains. The laws of accumulation that allowed ancient merchants to build wealth that outlasted their lifetimes. The pattern that appears behind every fortune that survived across generations. The single most consistent mistake high earners make in the decade after their first significant success. These teachings are coming, and each one is built on the same standard you have experienced here. Verified history, practical architecture, and the kind of clarity that changes how you see money permanently. Subscribe now and you will be notified every time a new lesson is released. Hit the subscribe button. It costs nothing. What you receive in return is a framework for building wealth that has survived 2,500 years of human economic reality. Before we close, I want to invite you into something different. This prayer is not a formality. It is an alignment. Close your eyes if you can, or simply align your thoughts with mine right now. What comes next is not just words. It is an invitation. Father, we come before you with gratitude for the wisdom preserved in the ancient record, in the history of men and women who built, lost, and built again, and who left behind the evidence of what endures and what destroys. We come honestly. Many of us have entered agreements built on avoidance rather than clarity. We have called ambiguity fairness. We have called the absence of difficult conversations a form of trust. We divided things equally on the surface, because we were not ready to have the honest conversation beneath the surface. And we have paid for that avoidance in resentment, in fractured relationships, in years of work that came apart because the foundation was built on comfort rather than truth. We ask for wisdom now. wisdom to see every alliance we are currently building or considering with clear eyes, and the courage to structure it honestly from the beginning. Wisdom to understand that defining roles clearly is not a sign of distrust. It is a sign of respect for the person we are choosing to build with. Wisdom to understand that a well-structured agreement protects the relationship. It does not threaten it. Only the poorly constructed agreement, the one built on assumptions and avoided conversations, is the one that eventually destroys what it claimed to protect. We declare that we are not prisoners of the agreements we have already made without sufficient clarity. We are builders. We have the capacity to return to the table with honesty, to renegotiate what must be renegotiated, and to construct something more solid than what we started with. We are not afraid of the hard conversation. We are equipped for it. We ask for protection over the partnerships forming in our lives right now. Let the right alignments come together with full clarity. Let the wrong alignments become visible before they cost more than they already have. Let every agreement we commit to from this point forward reflect the actual truth of what each party is contributing, risking, and prepared to sustain. Give us the courage of the Athenian merchant, who had the difficult negotiation before the voyage began, and arrived home with his wealth and his integrity both intact. Give us the wisdom to define the exit before we need it, to assign authority before we are tested by crisis, and to write the terms that protect the relationship before the pressure makes honest terms impossible to reach. In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen. Go in peace. The structure you build before the storm is the only structure that survives it. You are free.